Hey everybody, welcome to week one. Each week, I'm going to give you a narration over PowerPoint kind of lecture like this. This week is not going to be very long, but don't get spoiled because lots of times the lectures will be between 30 minutes and an hour in length. And what I like to say about my lectures in the online environment is that lectures supplement but do not replace the reading. And reading supplement but do not replace the lecture. So certainly in the live classroom situation, when I give a lecture, I try to save room for discussion right in the middle of the lecture so that we can kind of have an exchange while I'm lecturing. Now, that isn't possible in the online environment. So what I try to do is in the lectures is hit some highlights, but certainly I want you to spend time in the readings and then on the activities that I give you each week. So this week, being week one, this is really just an overview of the course, and that's what I want to do in this short lecture today. So what you ought to be doing as I give you this lecture, you could put this video on pause if you want. Pull up the syllabus. I'm going to go over a few things on the syllabus itself, just in the interest of understanding as we start the course. So first of all, on page 2, it says this is an introductory course in policy analysis. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is this is not a quantitative nor a qualitative methodology course. Certainly, quantitative and qualitative methodologies are part and important to the larger world of policy analysis. I am not prescribing any kind of particular point of view as to how policy should be analyzed. Um, so I really we do more of a broad sweep in a lot of senses, and I allow you to do a policy analysis on your own in which you can employ a methodology, but I do not require that you employ a particular methodology. And you'll see as we move along the course why I do that. But really, this course itself is based on the notion, or my observation really, that policy analysis is literally all around us. Policy analysis as a specialty really had its origins post World War II and became very important in the national government and then really disseminated out to other levels of government, really beginning in the 1950s and 1960s. And it was really a specialized kind of endeavor for a lot of people. And it was in the 1960s that the first kind of graduate degrees in policy started to become available. Well, now really policy analysis is all around us really, and it's done at a nonpartisan kind of level. For example, the Congressional Budget Office, but it's also done by partisans. So if you look at various think tanks, so say you look at the Heritage Foundation, which is a self-described conservative think tank, or you look at Cato, which is a self-described libertarian kind of think tank, or if you look at the Center for American Progress, which is a self-described liberal think tank, you will see policy analysis is going on in all these kinds of organizations. And so some of these organizations have very partisan kind of stance. Some have a more less partisan kind of stance. For example, the Rand Corporation in California really advertises itself as having more of a nonpartisan kind of stance. But really, what I'd like to do by the end of this course is help you as public managers, public administrators, healthcare administrators, nonprofit administrators, whatever direction you're taking or wherever you're at right now, help you really separate the wheat from the chaff. Because some policy analysis really isn't very good and some is really quite good. So I want you to be thinking about that. And And I'd also like you to think, as you look at the news, um, think about the policy implications of the things that are being said in the news, either on social media or broadcast media or even print media. Think about the policy implications that are going on there. And so, second, this course is designed to support the NASPA competencies, and NASPA is our accrediting organization. Um, and so the three competencies we support here are that you will understand institutional, legal, ethical, and structural aspects of the democratic policy process, understand the larger societal context of policy choices, and understand the roles and responsibilities of public administrators in the development and implementation of policy. So the point is that policy is not cooked up in a vacuum in legislatures, be that the United States Congress or the state legislature or the city council or the school board. Policy is interactive, and really a lot of people are part of the policy process. And so that's kind of the mindset I want you to start to adopt as we move along. On page 3, of course, I mentioned that this is a completely online course, not a hybrid. There's no expectation on my part that you meet with me in any kind of synchronous manner on Skype or anything like that. This is a completely online course. If you want to meet with me, or if you want to chat with me on the phone or otherwise, I am more than happy to do that. It happens that I'll be on campus in the spring semester on Thursdays, typically. So, if you want to meet on Thursdays, I am more than happy to meet with you on those days or other days as mutually agreed. But you can anticipate about 3 to 6 hours of reading per week. And the second element of the course is discussions and exercises. So yes, this is an online course, and that means that there's going to be something graded, some expectation of a deliverable from you each week, and that's graded. And the third is really the important part, which is your development of what I call a policy brief along with a presentation. And I'm going to talk about that next. So there's 310 points in this course, 200 of which is your policy analysis project broken up into 5 parts. So here's the 5 parts. There's really 4 parts plus a presentation, but here's what it's based in. The end result is you are delivering a policy brief and a presentation. So there's a scenario attached to that, and that scenario is this. I want you to envision yourself as working for someone in the legislative or someone in the executive branch of government as a policy analyst, and you're going to analyze a particular policy. And so what happens, what do policy analysts provide for, say, members of the legislature or members of the executive? Well, typically, when they're doing policy analysis, they're providing some information, and that could be a policy brief. So full-blown policy analysis, like if you go and look at the Congressional Budget Office and see some of their more extensive policy analysis projects, you will see projects that are well in excess of 100 pages. I'm not asking you to write a paper of 100 pages in length. I'm asking you to write a policy brief. And this goes back to my simulation here, which is a busy member of a legislature or city council member or a member of Congress. They don't have time always to read your 100-page paper. What they have time to do is read a maybe 10 to 15-page policy brief. Policy briefs are really all around us, but they're very important because they tell the story in a brief way. But then the second thing policy analysts often do for their bosses is they'll provide a presentation. So what I'm asking you to write is a presentation. You can do this in PowerPoint or Prezi or any other kind of media that we can all view. You might even have a website that you link us to. That'd be fine too. But this is basically the roadshow brief that this legislator or member of the executive would have at the ready to talk about this particular policy. So the project itself, I break it up into several parts so that you can bite off chunks as we go along. So the first part is going to be an exploratory menu, and that's going to exploratory memo. that's going to be due at the end of January, and that's 15 points. Well, that's where you're going to describe to me the policy problem that you want to explore. And that really, I think of that as pretty interactive. Um, if you're really foundering, my goal is to help you think through that. The second part, and this is where we start following really the Bardak book, his eight path or his 8-step approach. The first thing I'm going to have you write is the background and policy problem definition. That's going to be worth 25 points. I'm going to give you feedback on that. Then you're going to use that to write the third part. You're going to take the feedback I gave you and tweak the background and policy problem definition a little bit, and you're going to add on to that the policy alternatives and selection criteria. I'm going to give you feedback on that, and then you're going to come back with part 4, which is going to be the policy analysis brief in full, the entire brief. That's worth 75 points. Now, I say that's part 4. That's actually due. That's the last thing due in the semester, as in the 1st of May, which is the Wednesday of finals week. Before that, part 5, the policy analysis presentation, is going to become part of our discussion for the penultimate week, the second to last week. You're going to post your presentation, and students will get a chance to view it and comment on it. So part of that effort is your critique of other students, and I will provide a format to do that. And then the next thing, discussions and exercises, are worth 110 points. So that's how the course is broken up right there. So you can see it's loaded heavily on the project, but the project itself is broken up into several component parts. Okay, so discussions and exercises. Here's what I think. I've had you, some of you, in online classes before. Here's how I like to work discussions. I do like to weigh in, but I don't like to weigh in on every single student. What I really like students to do is do the reading, understand the reading, and learn from each other. I weigh in more general ways during the week. So typically what I ask you to do is do an initial post, typically by Wednesday, and then by Friday, I ask you to comment back to each other. So I used to actually have 3 required inputs per week, and I found that was really, students were having a difficult time with that. So really what I boiled that down to was 2 a week, but what I like to do is make sure that all of you are really engaging each other during the week and trying to the best of your ability to make the discussion as interactive as possible. I have the word policy in my brain, obviously. So the way the course is laid out is that everything for the next week is going to be posted as of Friday at 6 a.m. The previous week. Really, right now, the course is entirely open except for the discussions. And if you look at the discussions, they'll say, this discussion doesn't open until January 25th or whatever. So I'll post the discussion. It'll be available on Friday, and you'll have the next week to respond to that. Okay, so here's the project. It's a simulation, as I said, and you're providing this analysis to some policymaker in the executive or legislative branch. And you can choose any level of government you want, right? So national, state, local, special government. Lots of times students will find that state level or local level is easier to digest, and that's for some pretty clear reasons. A lot of the policy at the national level is big, and we argue about big policies all the time, and often it frustrates people because it seems that we don't come to any kind of conclusion. The other thing is national policy typically is broken up into component parts. So for example, if you wanted to write about immigration, I think that's great, but recognize that immigration is not just one policy area. There are scores of policy areas within immigration. So pick one of them. Don't pick, comprehensive immigration reform as a policy. That is just way too much to digest. You might want to talk about visa policy, You might want to talk about um, DACA. You might want to talk about certain things that are part of immigration policy. Because if you get really big, there's entire books written about the large policies. Same with things like Social Security. Social Security is a huge policy area. It's a third of our budget. So think about the kind of policy area that you'd like to approach, and we can talk about it in the exploratory memo. So the idea is that your deliverable is a policy brief of about 15 pages, including an executive summary. But that 15 pages excludes references and appendices if you use them. So 15 pages of core material. The presentation, the roadshow presentation, is about 12 to 20 minutes and needs to include an audio narration with it. So here's some strategies. I talked about not getting real big, but write about something you really care about and at an appropriate level of government. Recognize that one policy domain includes numerous policies, so focus, I talked about that. Recognize also that this is a one semester classroom project, so really do narrow your interests. And recognize that other people need to be convinced that your research is clear and replicable. So really, what that means to me is that you should pick a policy area that people can understand and relate to. It might be one that most people don't talk about all the time, which is great, but it should be one that people understand enough to be able to say, hey, I'd like to go look at that a little more. And so I use a modification of the APA style. Really, what I'd like you to do for references is use the in-text parenthetical citations. The policy brief is not strictly an APA paper. So as we move along, that particular aspect is not really one of my big concerns. What I like the policy brief to be format wise is to look professional and have the references cited in a way that I can follow them. The Canvas site, I think you've all been on the Canvas site. The big thing is that I try to be as redundant as possible, without being overly repetitive or without saying the same thing over and over again, but I try to give you more than one path to the goal. So that's my little attempt at humor. Basically, use the syllabus in conjunction with the Canvas site, and you shouldn't miss any requirements. If you do, please let me know, because I might have messed up in the way I posted things. I organize things into weekly modules. There's actually 17 weeks during the semester, including the spring break. There's no work assigned during spring break. I just organize them from week 1 to week 17 to help me organize and to provide continuity. So week 1 is, the week of January 7th, and week 17 is finals week. Grades, the grade module on the left-hand side of the canvas, please do follow that along and make sure you know where you're at in your current grade. So here's the meat of the readings that I have for you this week. I did that course overview. I want you to think about one thing this week, and I have two things for you. I have some readings, and then I have a budget simulation, which I'll get to on the next slide. What I want you to think about as we enter this course on policy analysis is the reality that policy and budgets are intimately connected. What I tell people is that policy without budgets are dreams, and budgets without policy are bookkeeping. It's really impossible to separate the two. Why? Because budgets really are reflections of policy priorities. And that applies, whatever level of government you're talking about. Well, fact of the matter is, at the national level, we've had a very difficult time for the last, say since 1970. We've had a very difficult time actually getting our budgets to balance. We balance our budgets by borrowing money. We borrow money in the form of treasury instruments. So you always hear the bond rates. Those are the instruments the treasury issues to pay the debt that is incurred when we spend in a deficit manner. So at the end of the year, our $4.2 trillion budget for FY19 is going to have more expenditures than revenue sources, more our revenue sources of fees and taxes and other revenue sources. And so to make up that deficit, we enter into debt. Well, the Simpson-Bowles report was issued a few years ago, and it seems kind of quaint now. But I want you to read this because there's a couple. I actually have a couple goals. One is it's a good example of policy analysis and recommendation by a commission. Special commissions, blue ribbon commissions, are formed a lot by Congress or by the president to study problem areas. And so this is one of the commissions that was formed. There have been hundreds of commissions over many decades, and the views expressed are often constrained by the ground rules that are going into the effort, but also commissions are free to say things in their reports that often members of Congress and members of the executive don't feel free to say themselves. So note the composition of this commission and note how it was formed, and also note that the report was not approved by all its members. But note the meat of the Simpson-Bowles Commission report and its effort to bring the budget into control. And so this brings me to the simulation. So there's this organization called the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, and I have again a couple goals in mind with you looking at this. But the main thing I want you to do is I want you to engage in a budget simulation, and then I'm going to have you post your results on the discussion board. What you're going to do with this simulation is try to limit the amount of national debt that the United States has over a several decade period. And you're going to do that. You're going to do that in the simulation by changing any one or many more of any numbers of policy on defense, on entitlements, on Social Security. The simulation asks you to make policy decisions in an effort to try to reduce the national debt. So think about, as you're doing that, think about a few questions like, is budget making a separate policy activity unto itself? And what are the measures of a good budget versus a bad budget? What do you think a good budget means? What's a bad budget? What's a balanced budget? Is it attainable? Is it even desirable? And what's it actually mean? And how do categories of discretionary spending versus mandatory spending affect budgets and policy making? The next thing I want you to do is look at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget themselves as an organization. Go navigate to their composition of their board of directors and look at some of the examples of their projects. And the reason I'm having you do that is because I want you to start getting used to looking at organizations like this, like Brookings, like Heritage, like Cato, like the Center for American Progress. I want you to start thinking about what is the particular perspective that these organizations might have when they themselves engage in policy analysis. So complete the budget simulation and complete the discussion questions that I have that involve that, and think about the connection of budgets and policy. That actually helps you later in the course when you're thinking about the connection of policy analysis and cost. So that's it for this week. Thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your discussions. Thank you.